So far, everything we did affected the entire landscape. But in a lot of cases, we want to select a certain region to do stuff on and ignore the rest of the landscape. In that case, we need to build some masking. And today, let's have a look at the generator mask. So we have 4 mask generators: the edge mask, the linear gradient mask, the radial gradient mask, and the wave mask. Let's have a look at the edge mask first. The edge mask generator will mask out the edges of the landscape and select the inside. Using this mask, you can create a single mountain at the center of the landscape object. For example, let me put this into the mask input of the noise displacement. And let's see. So you see it's masking out the edges. Now let's have a closer look at the edge mask node itself. So we have the margin X and margin Y. These parameters will grow the mask inward. So let me increase the margin X value. You see, the mask is growing inward. Likewise, the margin Y also grow the mask inward but vertically. Like that. And let's see the result. So you see we now have a single mountain at the center of the landscape. Next we have the padding X and padding Y values. The padding parameters will push the mask inward. So let's increase the padding and see how it looks. So you see we have a clearance area, and this area was created using the padding parameters. And let's lower the smoothness value and see how it looks. So you see now we have a sharp transition between the X and Y dimension. But if we increase the smooth to 1, we have a smoother transition between the X and Y dimension. Next we have the steepness value. Setting this to 1, you will have a linear transition between black and white. But if you increase this to something higher than 1, let's say 3, you see we have this kind of steeper transition between the black and white. And if you set this to something lower than 1 but higher than 0, let's say 0.5, then we have a reverse steepness like this. And finally, we have the min and max values. These values indicate the maximum and minimum values of the mask. So let's have a look. So you see out here we have the minimum value of 0. And in here we have the maximum value of 1. And we can set this to something like 0.2 to have the minimum value at 0.2. And again, we can set the maximum value to something other than 1, let's say 0.8. And you see, now the maximum value of the mask is 0.8. And using these two parameters, you can also invert the mask by setting the min value to 1 and maximum value to 0. So you see, we reversed the mask from black to white into a white to black mask. And we will have a look at these 3 parameters later. Next, we have the linear gradient mask. This mask will generate a simple linear gradient from black to white, like so. And the transition distance is set by this size value. So currently it's set to 500, which means that from black to white it will take 500 meters. And let me decrease this value, let's say to 50. There we go. So from here to here, now it's 250 meters. And we have the offset to move the linear gradient. And we have the direction value to rotate the linear gradient, let's say 45 degrees. There we go. We rotated the gradient by 45 degrees. And again, you can invert the values of the mask by setting the min value to 1 and the max value to 0. And here we have the vector to override the texture coordinate to generate a different kind of gradient. And next we have the radial gradient. So let's have a look. The radial gradient mask is a simple radial transition between black and white. And the radius is set by this parameter. Currently the radius is 500 meters, so the diameter is 1 kilometer, which is exactly the same size as the landscape itself. So let's set this down to 300. And we can scale the gradient using these 2 parameters. So let me try setting the X scale to 0.5. So you see now we have an elliptical gradient. And just like the other masks, we have the offset parameters to move the gradient. And we can change the angle to rotate the mask. And once again, we can invert using these two parameters. And finally, we have the wave mask node. So let's have a look. The wave mask will create a bunch of alternating black and white stripes like this. And we can change the stripe type to something else. Right now, the value is moving up and down like this. It's the sine wave kind of transition. But we can change the wave to something sharp like this or something like this. So let's try the triangle mode. The triangle will transition between 0 and 1 like this, right? Down here we have 0 and up here we have 1. So we have 0 to 1 and 1 back to 0, like so. And finally we have the saw type wave, which transition like this. It's gonna go from 0 to 1 and then drop back to 0. So let me set this back to sine wave and see the effects of this mask on the landscape. Very nice, right? And once again, we have the size to control the size of the wave, the offset to move the wave, and then the direction to rotate the wave. And one thing you should remember is that these three masks, these use the internal texture coordinate. That means you can go to the processor node and warp the texture coordinate to distort the mask. There we go. And I can increase the details here. There we go. So we now have a much better looking mask. And let's have a look at the mask itself. Very nice, right? And let me increase the size to 300. There we go. And increase the details a little bit more. 6. And increase the strength to 2. And let's have a look at the result. So we have a very natural looking mountain range. And let's try this linear gradient mask. We have something very nice going on right here. And let's try turning off this warp and see how it looks. It looks boring, right? Turn on the warp and it looks much better, much more natural. Now, let's have a look at these three parameters. First, let's have a look at the mask input. You can chain together multiple masks using the mask input right here. So let me drop this one here and increase the margin to 0.5. And let's see the result. We have something like this. And I can put this mask in here to combine together two mask generators. And let's see the result. So you see, we now have a combination of two masks. Now, this multiplier is a simple number to multiply with the existing mask, but for the intersect mode, this multiplier is not that useful because it's gonna end up just plucking out everything. But if you change the combine mode to something else, let's say combine, so you see we have something like this. And now we can lower the effects of the input mask using the multiplier, something like this. And let's have a look at the result. You see, this is the combination of two masks together, and this is the intersect of the two masks together. And let's see the difference. It's something like this. But the intersect mode is probably the most useful, so I set this to default. Now, another cool thing about the mask in World Blender is that you can carry out some additional math operations on the mask itself. So for example, let me put in a math operation right here, and I will power this by 2. This will increase the steepness of this gradient. So let's have a look at the gradient. So you see we have a much more natural gradient. And let's try turning off this node. So you see it's a linear gradient and you see a sharp end right here. But if I increase this to 2, we now have a much more natural transition between the black and white. So it's a transition like this. And if we set this to 0.5, we have something like this. And then we can put this into the mask input, all right? And we can use the combined mask together like so. However, you should keep in mind that the mask value should never be outside the range of 0 to 1. So if you set this to add and add 1 to the mask, it's gonna mess up quite a bit. And yeah, these values, these nodes will not guarantee a correct math operation. So always make sure that the mask is within 0 and 1.